There are moments that happen on live television that nobody plans for. Moments that no producer puts on a script, no camera operator anticipates, and no host is trained to handle. What happened on Family Feud that Wednesday afternoon was one of those moments. A wife stepped up to a microphone and told the truth about her marriage. Just like that. In front of a studio audience of 200 people, in front of millions of viewers at home, in front of her husband, who was standing 10 feet away, and for 30 seconds, as the audience went completely silent and the cameras kept rolling, it looked like that truth might destroy everything. Then Steve Harvey stepped in. What he did next has been called one of the most powerful moments in the show's history. Not because it was loud, not because it was dramatic, but because it was exactly the right thing, said to exactly the right person, at exactly the right time. This is the story of Denise and Arthur Coleman. And before it's over, you're going to understand something important about what it means to love someone who has stopped believing they deserve it. Denise Coleman was 61 years old. She had the posture of a woman who had spent decades holding things upright. Herself, her household, her family, and the careful, measured way she moved suggested she had long since learned not to waste energy on anything that wasn't essential. She had grown up in Shreveport, Louisiana, the eldest daughter of a Baptist minister and a schoolteacher. Her childhood had been structured around two things: faith and duty. You showed up, you did what was required, you did not make excuses, and you did not complain, because complaining was a form of ingratitude, and ingratitude was something her parents had no patience for. Denise had carried those lessons into adulthood and, eventually, into her marriage. She had met Arthur Coleman at a college reunion. Both of them were 43 at the time, both previously married, both cautious in the particular way that people become cautious after they have already survived one heartbreak. Arthur was a recently retired firefighter from Baton Rouge, broad-shouldered and deliberate, a man who spoke slowly because he believed that words had weight and should be chosen accordingly. They married 18 months after that first meeting. Their wedding was small, just family, just the people who mattered. Denise's two adult children from her first marriage, Marcus and Lorraine, stood beside her. Arthur's son, Dion, stood beside him. Everyone cried. Everyone meant it. For 7 years, the marriage had been, by most measures, a good one. Arthur was kind. He was reliable. He fixed things around the house and remembered birthdays and never raised his voice. Denise cooked on Sundays and kept the accounts and made sure that every bill was paid on time and that every appointment was kept. But somewhere in the middle of those 7 years, something had quietly shifted. Arthur had started drinking, not dramatically, not in the way that announces itself with chaos and confrontation, the quiet kind of drinking, a glass in the evening that became two, that became a bottle by the weekend, that became a presence in the house as constant and unremarkable as the furniture. Denise had said something the first time she noticed, and the second time, and the third. Each conversation had ended the same way, with Arthur agreeing that she was right, that he would cut back, that it wasn't a problem, that he had everything under control. And for a few weeks after each conversation, he did cut back, and then, gradually, he didn't. What made it harder was that Arthur was not a mean drunk. He was not violent. He did not become cruel or loud or dangerous. He became small, withdrawn. He would sit in his armchair after dinner and disappear into himself, present in the room but absent in every other sense. Denise would be across the room reading or watching television, and she would look over at her husband and feel a loneliness that she could not fully explain to anyone because, on paper, she was not alone. She had not told her children. She had not told her friends from church. She had not told her sister in Houston, who would have driven up immediately and made everything 10 times more complicated. She had managed it, the way she managed everything, quietly, competently, alone. When her daughter Lorraine had entered the family in the Family Feud contestant lottery as a Christmas gift, a fun, light-hearted thing, something to bring the family together, Denise had hesitated. Arthur had been having a good stretch, weeks of steadiness. She had let herself believe, as she periodically allowed herself to believe, that perhaps things were genuinely getting better. She had said yes. She had picked out a red dress she hadn't worn in 2 years. She had driven to the studio with her husband beside her and her children behind her, and she had thought one good day. Just one good day for this family. She had not anticipated what Lorraine was going to say during the interview segment. The Coleman family had come to the stage ready to compete. Lorraine, who had inherited her mother's composure and her grandfather's conviction, was sharp and quick in the opening rounds. Marcus, her brother, was funny in the easy, self-deprecating way that warm audiences respond to immediately. Arthur held his own in the early exchanges. Steady, thoughtful, contributing without drawing too much attention to himself. Denise played carefully, the way she did most things. She watched the board, watched the other family, watched her husband from the corner of her eye. The Colemans were competitive. They had advanced deep into the game, close enough to smell the prize money. The energy was good. The audience liked them. Then came the pre-commercial interview segment, the casual, conversational portion of the show, where Steve Harvey walks the family through a few personal questions, loosening everyone up, getting to know the people behind the contestants. Steve turned to Lorraine. "Tell me something about your mama that most people don't know," he said the way he always says it, warm, conspiratorial, inviting the kind of answer that gets a laugh. Lorraine glanced at her mother. Something flickered across her face. A decision being made in real time. "My mother," Lorraine said carefully, "is the strongest person I have ever met in my life. She has held this family together through things that most people never have to deal with. And she has done it without asking for anything in return, not once." The audience gave an appreciative murmur. Steve nodded, smiling. "That's beautiful," he said. "Strong mama. Every family needs one." He started to move on. "She's been holding our family together," Lorraine said again, and this time her voice had a different quality to it. The quality of someone who has decided that the moment they have been waiting for has arrived. "Because my stepfather has been struggling with alcohol for the last 4 years, and she has never once let the rest of us see how hard that has been for her." The studio went silent, not the polite, attentive silence of an audience listening to something interesting. The deep, airless silence of 200 people who have just heard something that was not supposed to be said out loud. Denise's face did not change expression. This was, in itself, extraordinary. The result of decades of training herself not to react publicly to things that hurt her privately. She stood at the podium with her hands folded and her chin level and her eyes forward, and she looked like a woman who had just been told the weather. Arthur, beside her, had gone very still. Steve Harvey had stopped moving. Lorraine was not finished. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes were bright with tears she had clearly decided not to shed in this particular moment. "I want my mother to know, in front of everyone, that we see her. We see what she does. We see what it costs her, and we are not going to let her keep doing it alone." The silence held for another moment. Then, from somewhere in the audience, a single person began to clap. Then another. Then it spread, not the explosive, spontaneous applause of a game show, but the slow, deliberate kind that means something. Arthur Coleman had not moved. His jaw was tight. His hands were at his sides. He was staring at a fixed point somewhere beyond the cameras, and his expression was the complex, terrible expression of a man who has just had something true said about him in public and does not yet know what to do with it. Steve Harvey stood between them, microphone in hand, and looked from Arthur to Denise to Lorraine and back again. Every instinct in him was reading the room, all of it, all at once. This was the moment when everything could go wrong. A lesser host might have pivoted to a joke to ease the tension. A more cautious host might have moved on to the next question and let the moment dissolve back into the ordinary business of television. Either of those choices would have been understandable, professional even. Steve Harvey did neither. He walked toward Arthur, not quickly, not with the energy of someone rushing to manage a situation. Slowly, deliberately, the way you walk toward someone you want to make feel seen rather than cornered. He stopped in front of Arthur Coleman, and he looked at him for a moment without saying anything. Then he put one hand on Arthur's shoulder, not a dramatic gesture, just a hand on a shoulder, the way one man steadies another. "Brother," Steve said. His voice was low, not quiet enough that the microphone wouldn't catch it, but low in register, the tone of a private conversation being had in a public space. "I need you to hear something. What your stepdaughter just did, that wasn't an attack. That was love. That's what love looks like when it runs out of quiet ways to say something." Arthur's jaw worked. He did not speak. "I know what it is to be a man who's struggling and doesn't want anyone to see it." Steve continued, "I know what it costs a man to have his struggle named out loud. I know how that feels right now. But I need you to look at your wife." Arthur turned, slowly, reluctantly, the way you turn towards something you have been avoiding, and looked at Denise. Denise had not moved. She was still standing at the podium, hands folded, chin level. But her eyes, which had been carefully forward, were now on her husband, and what was in them was not anger. It was not accusation. It was not the hard, exhausted look of a woman at the end of her patience. It was grief. Plain, honest, long, carried grief. The grief of a woman who loved someone very much and had been watching that someone disappear, slowly for 4 years, and had not known how to reach him. Arthur looked at his wife for a long moment. His shoulders, which had been rigid, dropped slightly. "She has been standing next to you," Steve said, still quietly, "every single day. Not because she had to. Because she chose to. And she's still standing there right now. Are you going to keep making her stand there alone?" The studio was completely silent. Arthur Coleman closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "No," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the microphone carried it. "No, I'm not." He crossed the stage to his wife. She did not move toward him. She let him come to her, which was perhaps the most honest thing in that whole honest moment. And when he reached her, he did not say anything. He simply stood in front of her and looked at her face as though he was seeing something he had not let himself see in a very long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Denise. I am so sorry." Denise unfolded her hands. She put one of them against his chest, not a hug, not yet, but the specific gesture of a woman checking whether someone's heart is still in the right place. Apparently it was, because she let him hold her. The audience, which had been holding its collective breath for nearly 3 minutes, finally exhaled. The applause that followed was not the game show kind. It was the kind that happens when a room full of strangers has witnessed something real and does not quite know what else to do with it. Steve Harvey stood a few feet away. He had his microphone at his side. He was not performing. He was just a man who had watched something important happen and was giving it the space it deserved. After a moment, he addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I've been standing on this stage for a long time, and I want to tell you something. What just happened here is not a game show moment. A game show moment is when somebody guesses the number one answer. What just happened here is a family moment, and family moments are the only ones that actually count." He looked at Lorraine, who had been standing quietly with tears finally allowed to fall. "Young lady, what you did took real courage. You didn't do it to embarrass anyone. You did it because you love your mother and you love your stepfather and you were not willing to watch them disappear into a secret anymore. I respect that enormously." He looked at Arthur. "Sir, you've got a hard road ahead of you, but you've got people who want to walk it with you. Don't make them walk it behind you. Let them walk beside you. That's what family is for." He looked, finally, at Denise. "And you. You have been the pillar of this family for a long time. Pillars need support too. Let them support you. You've earned it." The episode aired on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning, the clip had been viewed 11 million times. Not the gameplay portion. Not the fast money round, which the Colemans eventually won. The clip everyone was sharing was the 3-minute segment between Lorraine's statement and Arthur's apology, Steve Harvey crossing the stage, putting his hand on a man's shoulder, and saying, quietly, "Are you going to keep making her stand there alone?" Those 11 words became a phrase that moved through the internet with the particular velocity of things that are simple and true. Printed on images. Shared in comment sections. Referenced in posts by therapists, pastors, addiction counselors, and ordinary people who recognized in them something they had felt but not been able to name. The response to the Colemans' story was immediate, deep, and personal in the way that only authentic moments generate. Thousands of messages arrived through the Family Feud social media channels. Not the usual complimentary notes about the show, but specific, personal accounts. People writing about their own marriages, their own silences, their own versions of Denise standing at a podium with her hands folded and her chin level and her grief carefully out of view. Arthur Coleman entered a residential treatment program 3 weeks after the taping. He had made the call himself, the morning after watching the episode air with Denise beside him on the couch. He did not say much about what he had felt watching it. What he did say was, "I finally saw what she saw. That was enough." The program was 12 weeks. Denise visited every family weekend. Marcus and Lorraine came for 2 of them. Dion, Arthur's son from his first marriage, drove down from Memphis for the final one. It was the first time all of the children had been in the same room for something that mattered, and the experience was not without friction. These were adults with their own histories, their own feelings, their own complicated relationships to what had happened. But they stayed in the room. They worked through it. That, in itself, was progress. 6 months after the taping, a producer from the Family Feud team reached out to the Colemans about a follow-up segment. The family discussed it together, all of them, around Denise's kitchen table, and agreed, on one condition: Arthur would speak. Not just Denise, not just the children. Arthur himself would talk about what the experience had been, what treatment had been like, and what was different now. He agreed. The follow-up taped on a Tuesday morning. Arthur Coleman sat across from Steve Harvey in a quiet backstage area before the segment, and the 2 of them talked for 40 minutes. Off camera, no production, just 2 men having a conversation. Steve has never shared what was said in that room. What he has said publicly is this: "Arthur is one of the most honest men I've ever talked to. It takes a certain kind of courage to name your own failures out loud. He has that courage." During the on-air follow-up, Arthur spoke directly and without deflection about the 4 years that the drinking had consumed, the ways it had diminished him, the ways it had isolated Denise, the ways he had been aware of what he was doing to his marriage and had not known how to stop. He spoke about treatment with the specificity of someone who had done the work and was not interested in softening it for public consumption. He spoke about shame, what it had felt like to be named on national television, and what it had felt like, eventually, to understand that being named was an act of love. "My stepdaughter told the truth about me in front of 200 strangers," he said. "For about 30 seconds, I thought I would never forgive her for that. Then Steve Harvey put his hand on my shoulder and asked me if I was going to keep making my wife stand alone. And I thought, this man doesn't even know me, and he can see exactly what I've been doing. Lorraine didn't humiliate me. I had already done that. She just refused to let it stay invisible." Lorraine, watching the segment from the audience, was crying before he finished the sentence. Denise was not crying. She was smiling, the full, unguarded smile of a woman who had been waiting a long time to hear those words and was allowing herself, finally, to feel the relief of them. Steve Harvey, hosting the follow-up with the ease of someone who has learned when to speak and when to simply be present, addressed the cameras at the end of the segment. "I want to say something to every person watching this who is living in a version of what the Colemans were living in. Every man who is struggling and has convinced himself that hiding the struggle is the same as managing it. Every woman who is standing next to someone she loves and carrying the weight of what she sees alone. Every child, grown child, who has been watching their parents disappear into a silence and has not known whether it was their place to say something." He paused. "It is your place. Love is always your place." The Coleman story generated a response that extended well beyond the usual arc of a television moment. Addiction recovery organizations used the clip, specifically Arthur's follow-up interview, in family counseling sessions, as an example of what honest, non-defensive acknowledgement of harm could look like. Several therapists who specialize in codependency and caregiver burnout cited Denise's story in articles and conference presentations, noting that her experience, the competent, contained woman managing a spouse's addiction in silence, because she believed that was what strength required, was extraordinarily common and almost never discussed with this degree of visibility. Denise was invited to speak at a women's conference in New Orleans 8 months after the episode. She accepted. She was not a natural public speaker. She was, by temperament and by training, a woman who did things rather than talked about them. But she spoke plainly and at length about what the years of silence had cost her, and what the end of that silence had returned. "I thought I was protecting my husband by not saying anything," she told the room. "I told myself it was love. But love that hides the truth to protect someone's pride is not the highest form of love. It took my daughter saying out loud what I had been living with privately to show me that." She paused. "I'm grateful to Lorraine. I'm grateful to Steve Harvey, who understood in about 10 seconds what the right thing to do was and did it without hesitating. And I'm grateful to Arthur, who let himself be reached." She smiled slightly. "That last one was the hardest. Being reachable is harder than it sounds." Arthur, who had accompanied her to the conference and was sitting in the front row, laughed quietly at that. So did the room. Steve Harvey referenced the Coleman story publicly on several subsequent occasions. Once on his talk show, once in a commencement address, and once in a longer interview about the nature of his role as a host. In that interview, he was asked what had made him respond the way he did in the moment. Crossing the stage, the hand on the shoulder, the quiet words to Arthur rather than the audience. His answer was immediate. Because he was the one who needed to hear it. "The audience didn't need me to explain what was happening, they could see it. Lorraine didn't need me. She had already been brave. Denise didn't need me. She had already been patient for 4 years. Arthur needed to be seen, not embarrassed. There's a difference between those two things, and you have to know the difference." He paused. "I don't always get it right. But that day, I think I did." 1 year after the original taping, Arthur Coleman celebrated 12 months of sobriety. The family marked the occasion not with a party, but with a Sunday dinner, Denise's kitchen, all 5 of them around the table, food made from scratch. No cameras, no audience, no occasion beyond the occasion itself. Lorraine later described that dinner in a message she sent to the Family Feud production team, which shared it with Steve Harvey. She wrote, "We sat at the table for 3 hours. My mother laughed more than I've heard her laugh in years. My stepfather told stories about being a firefighter that I'd never heard before. My brother fell asleep in his chair after dessert and nobody woke him up. It was just ordinary and good. After everything, that was what we were all working toward. Just ordinary and good." Steve Harvey had the message framed. It joined a small collection of notes and photographs he keeps in his dressing room. Not trophies or awards, but evidence of the moments when television, at its most honest, becomes something more than entertainment. The story of the Colemans does not have a dramatic conclusion. There is no record broken, no foundation launched, no documentary filmed. What there is, instead, is a family that chose honesty over comfort at the exact moment when it was hardest, and was helped through that choice by a host who understood his responsibility well enough to step off the script when the moment required it. Denise still wears the red dress she wore that day, on occasions that call for it. Arthur is still sober. Lorraine still tears up when anyone mentions the word courage in her presence, though she pretends not to. And somewhere in Steve Harvey's dressing room, a framed note from a daughter describes what all of it was finally for: ordinary, good, enough.